So you're stuck in the car and you want to go somewhere, but there's too many other cars on your place on the road, right? Or you're trying to walk somewhere and there's too many other people and you're stuck. This is the problem of traffic. Traffic is actually quite an interesting topic, and it's studied in higher level math as well as in optimization theory. And one of the reasons is that traffic is many stacking events and how you can start to predict behavior with a large data set and a lot of different actors, right? So let me give you an example. There's something called the bullwhip effect. And if you're driving down the freeway and the person in front of you slows down, you have to slow down more than they did to make sure that you don't hit them in time, and make sure that you have reaction time to see why they slowed down, right? Let's say, a deer jumped out in front of the highway and someone slows down. You, being the driver behind them, would want to figure out what was going on. Maybe you didn't see the deer initially or something because you were further back. So you have to slow down enough to not only not hit them, but also we have this natural tendency to try to figure out, why did they stop? How else am I in danger, right? And that makes sense when something jumps out into the road. But what that does often cause is that then the person behind you has to slow down even more. So surprisingly, as in a bullwhip, the end ends up moving further than the start, right? The effects of a sudden change in the velocity of the cars has a more drastic effect further down the line. Now, in a highway that's not as crowded, this isn't as much of a problem, and that's because there's more spacing between the vehicles, so you have more stopping distance, more time to react, more time to figure things out. And additionally, the road is being used to a lower percentage of its total capacity, right? Because that can be another problem as well, but we'll get to that in a second. So back to this bullwhip effect. What happens then in a crowded highway is that any fluctuation from the standard velocity of the cars, say the average, will create a more drastic effect backwards. So let's say that you have 100 cars in this section of road, right? And it's only 2 lanes. Someone in one lane slows down because a squirrel jumps out or something like that. Even if the squirrel darts back off, into the hedges or whatever, the fact that they slowed down from 50 miles an hour to 40 miles an hour. If the person behind them was pretty close, because, there's a lot of cars here, it's not super spaced out. If, we're all only a few seconds behind each other, and the first person goes from 50 to 40, the second person probably went from 50 to 35. Because again, they have to slow down enough to figure it out, keep some spacing so that they don't get right up behind the car, and all of that. And there's kind of this natural fear tendency of it. Then the person behind them probably has to slow down to 30. And then where things get really catastrophic is that the person behind that person, what would this be, car E in the sequence now, jumps into the other lane, but slows down to do it. So now what you have is 2 lanes, and everything behind that lane change sequence suddenly has to slow down to 30 to 35 miles an hour. And then you have a section of the road where there is a slow zone. And that's exactly what happens in traffic. Cars are entering and exiting, which is interesting. Hypothetically, if you could get every car to speed up at the same rate, we could all just leave the traffic together. But because the car in front of you can't. Now that you understand a little bit of the theory of traffic, here are a couple of things to consider. One, as I mentioned, there's also the capacity limit. There is a total capacity for how many cars can be on the road at one time. And if there's too many trying to enter and exit, oftentimes you will get a traffic and a gridlock and a slowdown. But that is often very compounded by small behaviors of people who are not being attentive. So let me give you 2 examples. I have observed multiple times that when driving, there's a slow zone. And when you get to end of the slow zone, there's really not much going on. There's no construction, there's no accident, there's no reason that people actually had to consolidate lanes or something, right? That would be different. But there was one car in the center lane that was going about 15 miles an hour slower than the speed limit on the freeway. And there was one car next to them that was only passing by maybe a mile per hour or two more, like really, really slow passing. And what I kind of observed was that the traffic seemed to just kind of track behind them because very likely someone was coming up quickly and suddenly had to change lanes because they wanted to get around. And then the person behind them got cut off, had to slam on the brakes. And then the effect compounds backwards. So what can you actually do to help traffic? And you might be thinking, I'm just one driver in this huge, amounts of vehicles on the road at one time. What am I really gonna do? You would be amazed. You would actually be amazed at the impact that a single driver has on traffic flows. So, number one, generally matching the speed limit to the speed of traffic, right? If everyone is going the speed limit to maybe 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, it kind of in that range, you should not be going 20 miles an hour under the speed limit. Straight up, I have seen it cause problems. Imagine you're driving at night and it's pretty empty, everyone's going 75, even though the speed limit's 65, but you're all kind of in flow together. And then there's one person who's a little hesitant and they're going like 50, 55 maybe. And everyone's kind of passing them, but for some reason, they decide to not be in the farthest right lane. They're not entering, exiting, or in that lane. They're like 3 over to the left on a big freeway in the middle. And we all know those people who, when the freeway's empty, will rip around at like 90 to 100, right? And they kind of weave cars. I'm not recommending that. I think that's dangerous and can be very reckless. But what I've seen happen is that person that's weaving and ducking around and, street racing his friend or something stupid is expecting that everyone is going 75. That's probably how he's calculating his gaps in his head and how to slide between them. Because I have seen someone almost get into an accident, like very narrowly, because exactly that. He was probably in the far left lane and was trying to cut across like 4 lanes, going like 95 or 100, and everyone else was going 75. And there was gap, and he had a lot of space, but what he couldn't see is that in lane 3 or 4 over from him was someone a little bit up being passed going like 55. So when he jumped over a few, slam on the brakes, right? Like that kind of thing happens a lot more than you think. So this is a hypothetical scenario exactly, but I have seen this kind of thing pan out, right? Now, in that scenario, should the speed racer have been going that fast? No. Also, should the other person have been going that slow? Unless there is an actual reason, unless your car is damaged, unless your car is not capable of that kind of speed, or you're trying to get off of the highway because there's like a malfunction or something of that sort, in which case you should turn your hazards on. You should not be going that slow. If your car and you are fully capable, and you should be capable if you're driving a vehicle, do not drink and drive, don't smoke and drive. You should make sure you have sleep before you drive. Like, you should be fully locked in for driving. If you and your vehicle are fully capable, you should be going about the speed limit or about the speed of everyone else, right? Use kind of the common sense there. Now, to give another example, the speed at which you leave stoplights is really important. We all kind of play the game, right? For gas mileage and efficiency. When you're pulling up to the red light and there's a car in front of you, like stopped at the light already. And you try to do the thing where you slow down, but you don't want to stop fully because it's, harder on the vehicle in terms of gas mileage to come all the way to a stop and then restart, right? Starting is the worst part in terms of efficiency. So, you brake well ahead of time and you're trying to do that thing where you kind of like roll, like you're going slow, right? I'm not saying being unsafe, but you're trying to kind of stay rolling through it, and you're hoping the light will turn green in time. I think a lot of us have been there. When the person in front of you and the light goes green and you're still moving, if they accelerate nice and quick off of the line, you can generally keep your flow going. And then cars behind you can keep going and no one has to brake. That is an optimal scenario. What I see happen all the time, is that the person at the light was on their phone, the person at the light was zoned out, the person at the light was doing whatever. And so they take 2 or 3 seconds to even start moving again. And then what happens is the guy behind that was trying to keep his car moving does have to come all the way to a full stop, even if it's not like slamming on the brakes and sudden. You have to come all the way to a full stop. And then that means the person behind you now, because you're taking up more space from the light, now has to stop. So what you can end up with is a series of cars that are braking and stopping well before a green light. That is inoptimal. We want to maintain flow. So if you're the first person on the line, right, you're at the red light, you're the first one, and you know that, you're kind of on a busy road or something, you should be accelerating quickly when the light goes green. I'm not saying that you need to get up to crazy speed, right? I'm not saying that you should go insanely fast, even if you're on a road where it's 45, but you should get up to 45 pretty quickly. You should be on the gas within a few seconds, like within a second ideally, and have your car start moving, because it's creating space and it's creating the ability for the flow to be maintained. And that's what this is all about, maintaining flow. Now, another thing that I think people are horrible at, that I need people to pay attention to, is changing lanes. When I learned to drive from my dad, he gave me one of the greatest pieces of advice ever in terms of driving. If you do it right, you should not have to hit the brakes to change lanes. If you do it right, you should not have to hit the brakes to change lanes. What I see so many people do is they brake to change lanes. In order to change lanes effectively, quickly, and safely, you should have matched the speed of the lane next to you. You should have picked a slot where you will fit easily. And then you decisively, once you check your mirrors, check over the shoulder, all of that, you decisively enter it, okay? Those are the 3 steps. So an optimal lane change looks like a nice gap is created and everyone's going along. You find your gap and you're going the same speed and you slot in. That is how a lane change should be performed. What I see happen all the time is that people, for some reason, are scared of changing lanes. And so they brake to slow things down. But what happened when you do that is you just essentially drastically increase the risk that you cut someone off, which is actually incredibly unsafe, because if they're not paying attention, your likelihood of getting rear-ended is much higher now. And even if they are paying attention, what do they suddenly have to do? Brake. And generally very drastically, because you've just essentially cut the amount of space between them and the next car in half most of the time. That is a huge, huge factor in maintaining flow. If you do it correctly, you should never have to brake to change lanes. Now, there are moments, of course, if you're trying to get onto a crowded freeway and the people in front of you are kind of stopped and you're all coming to a halt or something, that's a little bit different, right? I'm not saying just keep accelerating, of course. Don't hit other vehicles. But if everyone is moving, you should not be braking to change lanes. If, you're going along with someone and you're trying to change lanes and you're gonna gap behind them, right? You're not gonna floor it and try to get ahead of them. You should ease off of the gas, of course, and slow down a little bit, and then find your slot. That should happen naturally. You should just kind of let the vehicle coast. You shouldn't have to touch the brakes at all, especially not hard, in order to change lanes. And the last thing I want to say is this can be extended to when there are lane closures and such. So let's say there's construction going on, right? And the lanes on the freeway are going to go from 5 to 4. What you should be doing as soon as you see that ahead of time, as soon as you see those, road construction signs, or you see the cones way ahead, if you're in the lane that has to merge, you should be already trying to find your gap. And start moving over. Because what tends to happen is that people aren't paying attention and they wait until they're actually pushed out by the cones, and then someone slams on the brakes to change lanes because they weren't decisive and they didn't plan ahead of time. And I'm not exaggerating, 1 or 2 people doing that can cause an entire traffic jam. It is incredible the amount of power that each person has when driving. So take these into consideration, try to improve your driving skills a little bit, and it's small habits that we all sometimes get caught doing. I know, you were taking a sip of your water or something at the red light. But generally, being a little more intentional about how you drive, when you drive, and being focused, safe, and decisive on the road will keep everyone safer, and it actually helps fuel efficiency when there's less traffic, because less stop and start as a whole, and it helps prevent traffic. And we all kind of hate traffic. So let's get where we're all trying to go and get rid of traffic. Do what you can, And this is Pro Game Knowledge. Thank you guys for watching.